Hola y bienvenidos a todos and welcome to my podcast From Lost to the River. I'm your host Richard, TEFL teacher, language coach and lifelong dedicated learner of Castellano Spanish. And I'm here to help you move out of the shadows of shame. Stop worrying about making mistakes. Move the focus from perfection to communication. Together, we'll get from lost to the river, we'll increase your autoestima, and in no time at all, you will genuinely feel and know that you can communicate with confidence in English. Hola, bienvenidos a capítulo 3 of From Lost to the River. In today's episode, I want to talk a little bit about the reaction of the other person in communication, because I believe that communication is more than a one or two or three-way street, as we say in English. There are other people involved, there are other variables involved, and often when we're speaking our target language, in your case English, there are situations and occasions where the reaction of the person that we're communicating with can have a real impact on how we feel about our abilities to communicate in our target language. And today, that's the subject that we're going to talk about, and thanks again for joining me. So the topic of the reaction of the other person, la cara de confusión, the face of confusion, is something that I'm met with a lot when communicating in Spanish. And I have to say that for years and years, my immediate response is that I'm not pronouncing things properly. This person doesn't understand a word I'm saying. And as soon as I'm met with a head tilt of misunderstanding, then I immediately have this feeling inside that I'm not good at this, and it affects my autoestima, my self-esteem, mi confianza. I just think that I have a long way to go with my Spanish. And it's only recently where I have really worked hard on my voz interna and figured out some ways to actually help me realize that actually, no, I can do this. Yo puedo. I'm going to try again, because there are more variables involved in communication. It may not just be down to you and your ability to pronounce certain words or your ability to express your opinion. Let's say, for example, if you're in a shop or in a meeting, there's other noises around. There's other distractions that can be happening, not just with the noises themselves, but distractions in the mind of the other person. For example, somebody might have had an argument with their partner that morning, and they're thinking about that. They're thinking about what to get the kids for their birthday. They're thinking about their plans for the weekend. You know, if they're not focusing or concentrating at the time when you say something and they ask you to repeat it, they could be in Mundo de Jupi, right? They could be somewhere else. They could be just miles away. And, you know, it's their fault, right? It's not your fault. They're in otro mundo. They're in their own head. They've got their own preoccupations and ideas and things going on. So that's one thing. When you say something to someone and they don't understand you, take a moment to pause and think about the fact that it might not be, and probably isn't, down to your lack of English abilities, first of all. That's just with the noise around in the room and the noise around in people's heads. Other thing is, say you're on a video call, there may be a bad connection, and for the time you were saying a certain phrase in English, the connection may have cut out, to use a phrasal verb there. It may have froze, the screen may have stopped for a second, and the other person could ask you to repeat yourself. You know, sorry, I didn't quite understand, I didn't follow what you just said. And so therefore, when that happens, it's very common for you to blame your English skills, right? To analyze what you said and the way you said it when that may not actually be necessary. And this was a subject that came up during a recent conversation I had for the podcast with Lauren Martin. Lauren is a language expert and copywriter. She specializes in helping language coaches and teachers and language academies with their marketing. And Lauren and I had a really interesting chat about many aspects to do with language learning. But in this part of the conversation, we touch on how meeting people halfway, recognizing and respecting the fact that they are communicating in a language that isn't their own, is a really fundamental part of the communication process. So have a listen. The willingness of the other person or the other party to adapt their accent, their pace, their language that they're using to account for the fact that you're not a native speaker of that language. How important do you think that is?
I think it's quite important, because if somebody is speaking really fast and you just can't get it, then again, we have a tendency to just think it's our fault. But I think there's no shame in asking somebody to just slow down a bit. And most people are willing to do that. And I think it is important that they do, because then you're able to actually hear what they're saying at a speed that's comfortable for you. But yeah, you obviously meet some people who aren't willing to do that. And I think that can be that can really affect your confidence, because again, you just put it on yourself. You think, well, I should be able to understand this. But there's a big step between the English that you learn at school and then going out into the real world and speaking to people in real life situations. So expecting yourself to just understand that without them adapting their speed or anything is quite unrealistic. It's a two-way street, communication. So if you're speaking to someone who's speaking English as a second language, I think it's your responsibility to make an effort to try and understand them as well. They're putting in that effort, especially here in England. I mean, no one speaks Spanish. So if a Spanish person comes and is speaking English, I think we all have a responsibility to make an effort to understand them, because we're not going to be able to switch into Spanish.
So that concept of both sides needing to make an effort when communicating is something that really resonates with me. And it reminds me of a piece of advice I was given when I first moved to Spain by a friend of mine from England who'd lived in the Netherlands for 9 years. And she said, when you are speaking Spanish and people give you this reaction of, what? Sorry? And they look at you in a way where they don't understand you. Remember, it's not always down to you, Richard. It may be the fact they just didn't hear you. They just didn't hear you, and they're basically saying, sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't quite catch that. Not in the fact that I didn't quite catch that because you said it wrong. Just, no te oigo bien. I didn't hear you. And that was a piece of advice that stuck in my mind throughout the time I've been developing my Spanish while being here. However, it may have stuck in my mind, but it's easy to say, right, the other person might not have heard you. Don't worry, it's not down to the fact you said it wrong. But actually, you can't help but feel like your language skills aren't good enough. You can't help but think, I'm never going to pronounce this thing properly. These people don't understand me. This is horrible. So I know how it feels, even for you listening to me now, for you to think, okay, right, well, that's all very well and good. But actually, when I'm on these video calls, I can tell these people don't understand me, and I really need to improve my pronunciation and increase my range of vocabulary. And there's all sorts of places I need to, work on to improve my English. And I understand that, and that's okay. And I'm not saying you're wrong. As I said in the episode 1, I'm not here to discount your feelings about your opinion of your English. However, what I would like to say is people need a little bit of time to acostumbrarse, to get used to the change of the way somebody is speaking. Te explico. if I go into a shop in a pueblo and the person who is serving me is not used to an accent like mine when I speak Spanish, there's not very many Británicos who go in this shop. It's very rare for this person to come across somebody from out of the pueblo or somebody that isn't a native Spanish speaker. So their reaction immediately for their cerebro is one of rejection. It's one of, oh, this is raro, muy raro, no entiendo este tío. And what I've found is that when you give them a chance, when you keep going, when you repeat words and start again and try, it gives their mind the opportunity to adjust their oídos, their hearing. They need to think, okay, so he pronounces the th, not the th. He can't roll his R's. Right, it means that's what he's saying. Okay. And I've managed to cross over this line, this immediate line of frustration of I can't do it, I'm not pronouncing it properly. And over the years, I've really realized that actually, when you give people a bit of a chance, it might be 2 sentences, it might be 20 seconds, it might be 30 seconds in some cases, but if you just keep going, then the chances are that you'll be understood. And it makes a massive difference to your self-esteem, it makes a massive difference to your confidence because it's out of your comfort zone. Somebody in a small shop in a little town, for me, in the middle of rural Spain, who starts the conversation with this face of confusion, with this I don't understand you. And if I persevere, if I continue, if I carry on with it and succeed in the communication process, I feel great. I feel like I've succeeded. I feel, wow, that's a big win for me. So that's a little background to another story that I'm about to tell you. This happened in the pharmacy near where I live. So I've been going to this pharmacy for the last 5 years. Now, there are obviously several members of staff in the pharmacy. One of them is una abuela. She's a little old lady, maybe nearly 70 years old. I don't know. I doubt she's listening to this podcast, and hopefully she won't be offended if she's not 70 years old, but she looks it, right? And actually, it doesn't matter if she's listening to this podcast. It doesn't matter if anyone in the neighborhood knows this woman, and that's cool because I told her that she's the protagonista of today's episode. And I told her that because this morning I had a class with some clients and I told this anecdote to them. And then I went in the pharmacy earlier and said, you were the protagonista of my class today. So I've already told her that she's the star of my day, essentially. This is the third time I've told the story, the second time in English, and I told it to her in Spanish. So anyway, I went in the pharmacy yesterday and I was asking for a certain drug I'm trying to get hold of and I can't get hold of it and whatever. Anyway, I told her this long story. And yesterday, for the first time in 5 years, her face was one of total acceptance of the way I speak Spanish. And she was nodding away and looking at me and smiling and helpful. And I say that because that's a complete juxtaposition of how she's been with me for the last 5 years that I've been going in that pharmacy. And she's given me the face of confusion every time, eyes half closed to a squint of what is this guy saying to me? And so I've always tried to avoid being served by her, if I'm honest. And yesterday this didn't happen. Like yesterday she was just totally, completely understanding of everything I was saying. And at the end of our interaction with each other, I said to her, por cierto, muchas gracias por tu paciencia esta mañana con mi nivel de castellano. And she said, que va, hablas muy bien. And I said, well, me cuesta lo mío, depende de la situación, porque normalmente cuando estoy hablando con usted, tienes una cara de confusión que no me entiendes nada con mi acento o mi pronunciación de varias palabras, no lo sé. And you'll never believe what she said. She said to me, no es tu castellano. Hablas muy bien. Es que soy sorda. And I had this like light bulb moment of almost a eureka moment. Not happy that this woman is hard of hearing, but just almost like felt this relief of, wow, all these years I've avoided talking to you. I've left this pharmacy with really deep feelings of sadness about my Spanish, of shame about making mistakes with you, about my pronunciation, my acento de Yiri. It's like, oh my God, this is so hard. But all that time, I just felt that I was awful at Spanish. And situations like the pharmacy compounded those feelings. And I just wanted to share that story because I think that it's real proof of the fact that there are many other variables involved in communication. We have a habit of prejudging how others will react before they've even reacted. This fear of making mistakes, this fear of how we may look to other people. And it made me remember an acronym of the word fear that I was told years and years ago. And the letters FEAR, it stands for false evidence appearing real. False evidence appearing real. We create this story in our mind that's not actually true. The fact that this woman was thinking that my Spanish isn't good, the fact that she couldn't understand me, that was all false. And in my mind, I made it appear real. And I believe that we need to just reset our perspective. We need to take a moment, take a breath, breathe in, calm down. Just take a second to think, actually, no. Yo puedo. Mi inglés está bien, ¿eh? Hace 10 minutos en otra reunión, they understood me perfectly. So there's no reason why now my abilities have changed. And so my message from today is keep going. Take those few seconds to realize that it's not all down to you and your abilities. Your base level of English, if you're listening to this podcast, well, you are obviously listening to this podcast, you can understand most of what I'm saying. Doesn't have to, by the way, you don't have to understand 100% of it. That's not the point. But in the context, if you can understand this podcast, tu nivel de inglés es bastante bien, ¿vale? Y ya está. Tú puedes. Sigue, keep going. Watch more stuff in English. Listen to more things in English. Read in English. Get that input in the mind, that comprehensible input. And poco a poco, you will improve. And just keep going. Tú puedes. Entonces, muchísimas gracias por venir, por escucharme, for your attention. If you have enjoyed the podcast and you're enjoying the series, please share it amongst your network and amongst anybody you think it'll help as well. Leave a review over on Apple Podcasts, a comment on Spotify. It'll really help me boost my message of positivity out to as many people as I can. And listening to podcasts is a great way of increasing your English vocabulary, to get used to, acostumbrarse a los acentos diferentes, the different accents and the different ways and intonation of English and how it's spoken. And with that in mind, in the show notes, you'll see a link to procoachenglish.com where you can download my free interactive podcast recommendation list. All the podcasts on there are separated by levels as well, so it'll give you a good place to start if you're not sure where to start when it comes to podcasts. There are lots and lots out there, so have a look at that. Enjoy the rest of your morning, your afternoon, your evening or night, whatever time of the clock it is for you, wherever you are. So thanks once again for being here. As always, it's been emotional, and I'll see you in the next episode. Adios.